everyone, I'm Sam Nordberg and welcome to the Get Real Business series. I've got the amazing Renee with me. Renee and I will have to take a deep breath because we've just been in fits of hysterics before pressing the record button for you guys. So I'm sure you'll catch up as we go through. We'll share something far inappropriate with you, I'm sure. Anyway, so the Get Real Business series is all about telling you behind the business about what really goes on in business. Today I have the amazing Renee. I can do this, Renee, and I haven't even been drinking wine yet. Renee, who's a branding photographer. She has an official bio, but I'm going to completely ignore it. Personally, because she's my photographer, and I've never had anyone make me feel incredibly comfortable in front of a camera like Renee does. But more than that, it's that she understands what it means to represent yourself as a brand and to make an image not just look the way you want it to look, but feel the way you want it to feel. And in the world of online sales, what you really want to do is be able to give people a sensation and a feeling over the internet. And that's incredibly hard to do. It's something I don't understand how to do, but Renee does. So that's why she's with us here today. Thank you, Renee. Hi. Hi. So thank you for locking your children and your dog away and whatever else you did to prepare for this. Much appreciated. So tell us a little bit about why you started being a branding photographer and why you started photography in general. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, look, it's a really, like many, winding road story. I am an HR professional by trade. I still work pretty much 4 days a week doing that.
Yep.
So my academic background, my work history and all of that has always been in corporate roles. And that, while fulfilling on some ways in an intellectual way, was never really fulfilling in what I wanted to do and how I wanted to work. I'm always been somebody who kind of thrives on taking responsibility and actually making decisions and doing things my way. Now, which kind of sounds a little bit, domineering, but really it's about actually having faith in yourself and trusting the decisions that you're making. And when you are part of a large organization, whether that be, government or otherwise, that's really hard to do. And it's something that I always craved, regardless of what job I was doing. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to do it, but I knew I wanted to work for myself in some way. I assumed that was going to be in HR because that's just what I did.
Yeah.
And I had always struggled with the idea of how I was going to do that in a way that was meaningful for me and was sustainable as a person on my own doing that. It happened coincidentally that as a hobby, I started photography. That was completely unrelated. It was just a way of expressing myself creatively, learning something different and new. And I did that and just played around with that for a while. And then I had kids, and that changes the dynamic for a lot of people, particularly women, obviously. When you've got that chunk of time off work, for me, there was a maternity leave period there, but it was also that whole soul searching kind of phase where it's like I always knew that I wanted to work for myself. I didn't know what I was going to do, but now I also had this child that meant that I wasn't really happy going back to the work that I was doing. So it was really that kind of kick up the butt to try and figure out how I was going to make it happen that I did work for myself rather than go back to that corporate kind of role.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to lie. I think before I got to this point, I've had, I think by count, 4 other attempts at business. So I started the obvious. So I started like when I say started, I say I harassed my younger brother into building me a website. And that's about as far as I got to build a HR consulting. And then I did nothing with it because I actually had no idea what I was going to do. It was just like, okay, well, this was what was going to happen. That didn't work. Unsurprisingly, I went and then, okay, I like throwing parties. I'm going to start an event planning business. So I actually really did dive quite a bit into that space. And it was something that I enjoyed doing, but it was also something that was not necessarily true to me. It was just picking something that you wanted to do because you'd had good results doing something along those lines previously. So it wasn't aligned to who I was. It wasn't my interest area. It was just convenient and really hard to get work in because what I was doing was private events. So I thought, well, this is not very smart. I might try and rebrand myself to corporate events, which I did, and also had not a lot of luck because it was the same issues that I was facing. It wasn't necessarily work that I liked doing. It wasn't reflective of who I was. And as anyone who does work for themselves knows, you've got to put in a lot of hours. And if you don't actually like doing what you're doing, you're just not going to last. So throughout all of this time, I've gone back to work part-time. I've had another child. And throughout that time, I've just always taken photos, and having the babies there meant that I could do that at will. And then that kind of moved, I guess, to me working for or taking photos of other people's kids. And that's kind of where I stayed for a while, is just really casually taking photos of people that I knew, referrals. But that changed again when I decided, no, I've now got 2 kids. I really, really don't want to go back to work on an ongoing basis. And so for me, it's not so much that I just really, all it was that I wanted to be the one in charge and to have the ability to make my own decisions, whether that be good or bad. And I totally own the fact that I've got 3 failed attempts at businesses behind me. I've learnt from those. And I think that's part of what drives me, is that ability to go, yep, this is my decision. Yeah. And I'm going to run with it, and it's going to be on me whether it's good or bad.
I love that. And it's a bit of a trend in the interviews that I've done. There have been a couple before you, which will come out as well. Very few people who I speak to ever started doing exactly the thing they thought they would do. It's never quite like that. It's never that you just, well, not never, I'm sure there are people who do. But for a lot of the people I talk to, it's not that they just had this epiphany and that was their thing, but that it's been this, like you said, this winding journey, this development process where you try a thing and you have some wins and you have some failures and you move on, and it develops and grows into something that at the beginning you probably could never have decided, because you just didn't know that that's what it was. Yeah.
No, cool. And I think the biggest change for me came when I went, so I'd had these businesses that didn't work, and I had these photos that I was taking that I enjoyed doing it, but there's challenges in the photography market, particularly in the family photography market. And I knew that I'm not the greatest photographer in the world. Do you know what I mean? There's a bazillion photographers, and to be able to really excel in that, there would have to be some thinking that I need to do about where I was going to position myself in that market. And that, I think, process was really helpful for me. And when it came down to it, it has also informed what I do now in some ways. So it was about accepting the strengths that I had brought from all of these other things, rather than actually trying to ignore them and go, well, that was a mistake, I'm going to push that aside and pretend that never happened. I'm going to separate my life here corporately to my life here as a photographer, and never the two shall meet. It's going, okay, all of these things combined to who I am, and all of these things are now really reflective in not only my brand but the products and services that I offer. And I think that's was probably in that period of time the biggest lesson that I had, was that you've just got to accept some things and own them, because as I'm sure we'll talk about later, is that is what sets you apart, and that's what helps you be who you are and define your brand.
And from a branding perspective, I think that your experience is incredibly valuable. I mean, like you said, it's not just about failed businesses, and I don't think that even failure is the right word for it. It's definitely a learning experience. But even your experience in the HR world, I mean, you understand people, and I think that is incredibly powerful. And it's not, photography is about photography, but branding photography isn't just about photography.
No, exactly.
It's about understanding a message and a purpose, and that is something that you definitely bring from all of your experiences. That
exactly.
A lot of and apologies to everyone out here, I'm going to offend right now, a lot of just photographers wouldn't do, because you bring all of that experience with you when you help someone build a brand.
Exactly. Look, and like anything else, there is experts in different areas, and you would expect those individuals, like within photography, obviously there's a whole lot of niches, and you expect that in any big industry, and with that comes specialist skills. I just wasn't, until that point, wasn't prepared to accept or really acknowledge where my specialist skills would place me.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you love about being in business? What are the upsides?
A lot of it has to do with okay, in being in business in general is those things that I touched on before, is the fact that if I want to, and I'm really haphazard, and I do preface this with the fact that my life means that I'm also working part-time. So I manage my business around working part-time as well as being a parent. And so I think those three things mean that I operate in a certain way that people who are focusing solely on their business wouldn't do. But that gives me then the ability to be flexible in how I approach things. So one of the things that I like the most is that if I am somewhere where I've got an opportunity to sit down and read, or to write emails and do a task, I can take advantage of that opportunity. It gives me the flexibility. If I am in a time when I've got a really solid chunk of time to write, I can write my opt-ins, blog posts, whatever else. Do you know what I mean? So I think the flexibility of being in my own business means that I have the opportunity to just shape my day the way that I want and need. And that's on top of like I say, on top of just being in control and going, nah, that was a stupid freaking decision. And just being willing to own that rather than have to go through a chain of authority, which I'm really, really bad at.
You are a little rebellious, to say the least. Having known you a little while, you do that well. I love the fact, I think there's a bit of a stigma sometimes attached to when people still have a part-time job or a full-time job and are building a business on the side. And I think in the online world, sometimes we look at that and we poo-poo that. But honestly, it's the smartest thing that I've ever seen people do, because I know that people say, you should just throw your eggs in one basket and commit and whatever. But you know what? That's not realistic. We have houses and rent and mortgages and children, and it's not a sensible idea to put yourself into so much financial stress that obviously the business is going to fail just because you physically can't cope with the stress and the pressure. Exactly. And I think it's you're right about the flexibility, but I also think it's incredibly smart to build things in and around the things you've already got going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that ownership is part of that. And you are right. For a long time, I wouldn't say to somebody that I still worked in my day job, but now I'm very comfortable saying that because it's created then, I don't know, just that definition. I can say, no, I'm not available on these times. And it gives me a reason to say that as well. And it also shows that it's the same both ways. I know a lot of people who have a side gig also don't tell their employer that they've got that happening. And it becomes this like secret balance. And I'm like, well, no, because that's not how I work. It's just not my personality. But at the same time, I bring stuff to my day job that I wouldn't be able to bring to my day job and add value there that, if I hadn't spoken about that or if I'm not open about that. I've taken headshots of half the organization now, which I wouldn't have done, and I wouldn't have had that practical experience with all of these individuals. I've delivered sessions on content marketing to people because it's a body of knowledge that I have from over here that I've been able to apply over here. So I think when you start accepting these things, then they become part of who you are, and you can offer more as an individual, as an employee, and as a business owner.
So true. And I just wish that more people would start to look at it that way. And maybe that's just something like everyone needs to be more vocal about, but I think it's an incredibly smart way to look at it. So tell me, sorry.
No, you're right. I was going to say too, I think, in the HR space, so if I put my recruitment hat on now, it's very common to have portfolio careers where, somebody has this career for 5 or 10 years and then they move into this kind of career. I think though it's hard, there's been this distinction in the past where you either are an employee or self-employed. Whereas I think now it's kind of moving more to that splitting. So you can have that portfolio career where part of your life is an employee and part of your life is self-employed, rather than them being two very distinct things that you're either one or the other. I think it gives that change is slowly happening, perhaps.
Yeah, I think employers are beginning to become much more flexible about employment in general. I mean, we've seen a big shift in working from home and in more flexible work hours. So I guess this is just the next step in terms of that flexibility, hopefully.
Exactly.
So those are the things you love. Tell me what you don't love.
It's the flip side to the same coin. I don't love that I've got some days where all I want to do is actually shoot or edit, and I'm not, and I'm dressing in my corporate gear and I'm walking into the office and hating life as I go. Or alternatively, when I've got to go and meet somebody on my business days, and all I've got in my head is all of these other things that I need to do from the work. So while you can have both, and I like having both because I do well in that space, that doesn't mean it's always like that. And sometimes those things cross over, and I crave flexibility. And so when I don't get that for whatever reason, it makes me frustrated. I think the other thing that I find most difficult about being in business for yourself is, and maybe this is a personal reflection, is that I miss getting that reassurance of what you're doing is okay. Now, I might be happy to be in control of my decision making, and I'm happy to own it if I make a mistake. But when you're in an organization, there's always somebody there giving you feedback, whether it's positive, negative, or otherwise. Whereas when you're on your own, you don't do that unless you're this needy little soul like I am and reach out to people and say, is it okay? Is it okay? And that's where your online networks and cohorts and stuff like that are really valuable. So I think that's probably the other part, is that knowing you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. And you are definitely not the only person to say that. Whether you like it or not, being in business for yourself is this incredible journey of self-development. Often, and Jay said this, is often forced self-development. Whether you like it or not, you're going to bloody learn about this. And part of that is learning about what you're good at, but also that need for reassurance, and that need to know that you're doing the right thing, and that need to know that you really do know your shit, even, though today you feel like you don't. And yeah, it's full on, to say the least, sometimes.
Exactly. And like you say, it's the same. It's the two sides of the same coin. I love the fact that if I don't know something, like I've been completely immersing myself in the last month or two about studio lighting, because it's not something that I do use. It's not something that I've used in the past, but it's also something that I know that I probably need to add into my bag of tricks. So I've been immersing myself in this space, and I like how I can do that I can choose to do that, and I can go in. I don't know something, sure, I'm going to learn about it. At the same time, you come across things and I look at it and I go, like, seriously, there is so much in this world I don't know. How am I ever going to know what I need to know? Yeah. So it's like one day the same opportunity that you really love is the thing that you hate the most. And I think that's probably the same for so many components of being in business on your own.
Yeah. I love the way that you can honestly say that often the pros and cons are both, the flip side of the same coin.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you are, despite whatever you will say, an incredible brand photographer. So what I want you to do is share with the audience just 3 quick tips that they need to know about branding photography. Now, obviously, I understand that is a huge, huge concept. So take that to mean whatever you will, but share with us 3 things that we probably really need to know when we're thinking about our personal image and putting ourselves out there from a branding and a photography perspective.
Yeah, and I think you're right in that it is a big thing, but it's also something that's not easily defined. So if I put some parameters around it. Now, when I say I'm a brand photographer, I'm specifically talking about imagery that people can use for their business to help portray their brand. Now, most cases that means portraits of themselves, because a lot of the people that I work with are service providers, they're sole entrepreneurs, they're all of that kind of stuff. So their product or services themselves. So what we're doing is we're talking about branding themselves and putting them out there. Now, there is also the component of visually making sure that the imagery that you put out in the world is consistent with the brand that you put out in the world. So, but rather than kind of touching on that too much, I think what is really important is to, and I would say to anybody, is to actually just be really clear on what your brand is. Because I think more than anything else is that inconsistency is the biggest killer. So you may have a brand that is, and I'm just going to just throw random things together, right? You may have a brand that's all about high professionalism and cut to the chase, and you use neon green and brown in everything, right? Now that might go against everything I believe in, that's aside.
Yeah,
But
neon
if
green and
that is
brown.
your
What is
brand
this?
and that's on your website, and that's what you need to run with. Do you know what I mean? You can go through a process of evolving that, sure. But if you have neon green things one day and then like subtle purple things the next day, then you are going to be causing a discordance with your viewers. So, and it's just like tone in your writing. So I know that you've been speaking with copywriters.
Yeah.
So if you have a tone in your writing that is really upbeat and chirpy one week, and then it's really to the point and professional the next week, it's actually that lack of consistency breaks down trust.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at online business predominantly, when we're looking at making a sale through a website or getting a new client through a website, consistency and trust is key. So everything that you put out there needs to be consistent. So that would be my first long-winded tip, is make sure things are consistent.
Yep.
And again, that's taking aside the fact that sure, you might want to evolve your brand and those things are completely doable, but they need to be intentional. And what you need to do is also be intentional.
Yeah.
I think one of the next things is to really, and I know that, like I said, I talk generally to a lot of solo entrepreneurs, people who are the brand themselves. And I think that is about being authentic to who you are. Now, a lot of the process that I work through is about helping people find what that authentic brand is. And a lot of the trouble that we find as just people is that we don't necessarily feel confident in the characteristics that make us stand out, because they could very well be things that we're a bit self-conscious about. Yeah. Even though most of the world sees them as a positive thing, we are self-conscious about it, so we try and hide it. So that's where the process of really getting to know who you are, getting to know what your brand is, and being authentic to that brand is actually, to me, one of the most valuable things that you can do. Because if you are clear on that and you are honest in your communication, in your visuals, in your tone, when you write and what you share online, then that consistency comes automatically. Do you know what I mean? Because you are being real. You're not actually trying to put on a front or put on a specific layer over the front of who you are. So that consistency becomes much easier. You become much more casual and relaxed, and you own that brand more. And there, again, you've got greater trust in you as a brand. Yeah. So those things just really pile on top of each other.
I think that's a really big thing, and it's something that when I first started talking to you, I didn't know. I mean, I remember you asking me like, oh, how do you want people to feel, and what do you want them to get at from it? And I was like, I don't know. Like I had never thought about that. And you're right. It's I don't always think that these people are purposely hiding aspects of themselves, but I think we've just gotten so used to not enhancing the bits of ourselves that are different. And like you said, it's just about a self-confidence thing. It's not that they're trying to be fake. It's just that they're not really letting go and just being
exactly
them. And that's
exactly
that's a big one.
And personally, I know that the part of me that is loud and colorful and really expressive is the part of me that I felt least confident in, because that makes you stand out and it makes you something or somebody that people look at. Whereas, and I hated that. Yet at the same time, if I just own that and be that, that is what helps define me in my brand, in my business. And so, but it also makes me a whole lot happier now, because I don't have to pretend and I don't have to be uncomfortable with those things.
And that's the part of you we all love anyway. So, I mean, like you said,
exactly,
other people see them as positives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Tip number 3. What's your last one?
So what have I done? I've looked at
being consistent,
being authentic. And I think be intentional is probably the other one that I would say. And I find this, I get trapped by this all the time, in the sense of, like anyone, I get online, I have a look around and I go, oh wow, that's really pretty. That person's work is better than mine. Or, maybe my clients want this kind of photo because, they're really pretty photos. And then you start questioning. But I think when I come back to what I genuinely believe in, and that's around the consistency and authentic brand, it means that you've got to be intentional in what you're putting out. And I think and I'm trying to think of a way that I'm not going to piss off people now.
Just piss them
There
off.
is,
It's fine.
say, in my world, there's a whole lot of photographers who do branding photographers who do really beautiful, pretty work. Do you know what I mean? You know, they might be caftans floating at the beach, or they might be, you know, these incredibly styled homes where you look at them and you go, oh, wow, that looks amazing. I can't possibly be like that person. And to me, they are beautiful images, and there is no doubting that, but they're not necessarily intentional, authentic images of the person that you are putting out, you know, the message that you're putting out. Now, there's this what do you call it? There's this conundrum in our brains that we want to put the best foot forward. We want to be seen as the most successful, the most amazing, beautiful person with the cleanest house. But at the same time, that's not necessarily, I mean, if that is you, then that is authentic and that is consistent, and that's what we want. But I think people fall into the trap of doing that and feel like they need to do that. Whereas I think if you intentionally look at who am I, what do I want to put out, and think about those components, then you can actually weave that back into the content. And when I say content, I mean imagery that you put out into the world, whether that's a post on Facebook or Instagram, or whether it's a photo of yourself. It's being intentional in what is your message that I'm putting out via this particular piece of content. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that you're right. We get caught up in watching what everyone else is doing, and you kind of you don't even mean to, but you end up sort of following a trend. And before you know it, you're completely off track. And you're right. It's intentional is not necessarily, I don't always think about being planned, but sometimes it's just about giving something a second thought before you do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's as much as that. All right. So you need to be consistent, you need to be authentic, and you need to be intentional.
Yes. Yep. And I think to tie them together, the consistent and authentic leads to trust.
Yeah.
And that's what's key. And the intentionalness is what helps you maintain that.
Yeah. I think in a nutshell, realistically, what you've done is given us 3 really key components to building a brand. And you're right. At the end of the day, it's all about trust. I say that day in, day out when it comes to courses. Like, no one will ever buy your content if they don't trust you.
Absolutely.
And that process of trust comes definitely from your images. It comes from your brand as a whole, the words you put with those images, the image you portray across the internet in every way, shape, and form, the things you say, the things you show, the things you do. And if they can't trust you, they won't buy from you. It's as simple as that.
And I think it's interesting to note that it's something like your brain will process an image some 60,000 times faster than it will words. Yeah. So even if you've got the most perfectly scripted text there, if you put an image next to it that's not consistent with those words, it's irrelevant what those words say, because your brain processes what's in that image so much faster, and it affects us on a more intrinsic level. It's a more emotional level than it is the logical level that your brain works through when it's reading text. So you can imagine you be reading something and going, yep, that's really good, but something about this doesn't seem right. And you don't even realize that it's the impact of the imagery combined with the text is having. Each thing's individually could be very good, but when you put them together, there's the inconsistency, and that's what erodes the trust. So it's about, I guess that's where the intentionalness comes in.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I guess it's something that's always good to be reminded of, that, and you'll be very happy to know that the copywriter said the same thing, is that brand isn't just about the words, it's about the whole, it's about everything. And I think you're both right, which is that neither one of these will work independently. And your brand is so much more than just a pretty picture or just the right word.
Absolutely.
But it's a combination of everything that goes out into the world about you.
Absolutely. And I think from my own experience and from experience working with the clients that I have done, is that don't be afraid to put out that authentic self, because it's easy to be. And you don't have to, bear dirty laundry and all of that sort of stuff. But there are some components of yourself that you might not feel, totally comfortable with, but is a key part of who you are. And don't be afraid to share that, because that's who you are. It's not like you're lying. It's not you're not being disingenuous or anything along those lines. It's just owning who you are. And I think it's even worse not to put yourself out there.
Yeah. That wraps us up perfectly, because I think in a nutshell, that's what branding is. It's the ability to put yourself out there. And we couldn't have said it any better if we tried. So Renee, obviously people want to know more about your wonderful work and what you do and all the stuff you've got going on. So where can they find out more about you and what can they come and see?
Sure. So my website is www.reneeshea, which is reneeshea.com.au. And it is Renee Shea Photography in those social media platforms. If you want to go over there, you can have a bit of a read about my take on personal branding and how I feed that into photography. But also there's some on the headshots section, you will find some great, a downloadable document that I created recently that has just got some really awesome ways that you can integrate your personal brand into photos that you put out there. Even if they're photos that you have a friend take on their phone, it's about how you build that kind of brand into your own photos, and then how to make sure that you feel and look great at the same time.
Nice. I will put all of those links down below for you people to make sure that you can go and check that out. Honestly, I highly recommend you go and have a look, especially with the headshot stuff. I know that having my photo taken was honestly something that terrified me to start with. I was that person that hated having their picture taken, didn't feel comfortable in front of the camera. But there are some really easy things you can do to just make that whole process less stressful, if nothing else, which is always a win.
Yep.
And to put the best image of yourself across. So make sure you go and check out Renee. It's the best thing you'll do today. Renee, thank you so much for being here with me this evening. I really appreciate it. Guys, that's the end of today's episode. As always, make sure you check in for the next video, and I will leave all the links down below for you. I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.